Many thanks indeed for talking to us. Thank you. Well, Tadhg's here with more business news and more on the impact of coronavirus in just a moment. First, though, a look at our headlines on Afternoon Live. The number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in the UK has jumped to 85. That's as a public health campaign gets underway, urging people to wash their hands regularly. New government measures have been announced to help deal with the outbreak. People who self-isolate will get statutory sick pay from their first day off work. And the former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, is standing down from the US Democratic leadership race. He says he'll now support Joe Biden.
Hello there, here are your business headlines on Afternoon Live. The government has announced changes to sick pay to help contain the coronavirus, but the trade union body, the TUC, has asked for support for workers who don't qualify, such as those on 0 hours contracts. There are fresh doubts for the future of Flybe. It had been counting on a £100 million loan from the government to ensure its survival, but that is now in doubt. The Financial Times reports that insiders believe the regional airline has enough money to keep flying only until the end of the month. And Virgin Atlantic is freezing recruitment and asking ground staff to take unpaid leave to help it cope with the downturn in passengers wanting to fly during the coronavirus outbreak.
And the last time we talked, the markets were bouncing back a little.
They were a bit. Let's have a look at where they've ended the day. You can see there, well, it all looks pretty good, doesn't it? But of course, it's not necessarily a brighter picture for the economy in general, for the rest of us. Keep in mind, these big gains that have been made by the FTSE today and by the Dow so far in trading today in New York are bouncing back from one of the worst weeks on record, the worst week since the financial crisis last week. And the reason investors are getting excited is because they think things are getting so bad with the coronavirus, and they're hearing words from various governments that the governments might be ready to step in and start boosting public spending to try to counteract some of those effects or impacts of the virus. In the US, they're also actually quite excited about the political developments of the last 24 hours. The fact that the Democratic moderate Joe Biden appears to be coming out on top so far in the race to become that party's contender for the presidential election, putting Bernie Sanders into second place, and he's very much seen as somebody who's not a friend of business. And then look at the two big gainers that we've been seeing in the FTSE today, Morrisons and Reckitt Benckiser. Morrisons, we've been hearing all kinds of reports from supermarkets about panic buying. I've just seen a photograph sent to me by a colleague of an empty shelf of toilet roll. And Reckitt Benckiser, what do they make? Cleaning products and hand sanitizers. So that just gives you some context to why those stocks are doing pretty well. But airlines, as we've been hearing there in the headlines, not doing well. Let's talk about developments with Fiona Cincotta, a market analyst at City Index. Thank you very much for being with us, Fiona. To think that governments are ready to unleash some spending to counteract the coronavirus. What exactly are we talking about here?
That's correct. And the other thing to keep in mind here is that the Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, put in emergency rate cuts yesterday. So they cut 0.5% off the interest rate. Now that's for businesses. As far as businesses are concerned, this is great. Reduced borrowing costs is obviously business friendly. Now what's happening here is investors are also looking about thinking which central bank is going to be next. We've got the ECB, the European Central Bank meeting next week, and then the Bank of England meeting at the end of the month. So there is this hope that the ECB and the Bank of England will also be considering cutting rates to support businesses through what could be a very difficult economic time with coronavirus.
And indeed, the incoming governor of the Bank of England has been talking about just that today, although some people seeing, reading between the lines of what he said and thinking the bank might take more of a wait-and-see approach on whether to cut the interest rate. But is that part of the reason why we've also been seeing the value of the pound kind of at the lower level of its recent range versus the dollar?
Exactly, that's right. Because whilst it's supportive for stocks and businesses to have lower interest rates, obviously it's seen as pound negative. So that's something that we could expect to weigh on the pound going forward. At the moment, investors are just gauging this. They're trying to decide whether it's something that the Bank of England are actually going to go ahead with. And as you've said, the Bank of England are sort of saying that they just want to see what happens with the data over the coming weeks to see what happens. But that is one of the reasons why why we're seeing the pound staying at this sort of 128 level.
And it really is quite remarkable to see in a time of crisis like this, the winners that there are also out there in contrast with the losers. Obviously, airlines are doing quite poorly. We were just talking there about the efforts taken by Virgin Atlantic to keep a lid on the cost of this crisis for them. And then you have supermarkets and the chemicals firms like Reckitt Bensing are doing pretty well.
That's right. I mean, I don't know if you've tried to go and buy some hand sanitizer, but I certainly have, and it's impossible at the moment. So, yeah, that's paying off. We're seeing Reckitt Bensing doing extremely well. Obviously, again, with supermarkets, as you mentioned, we've seen many photos and going into supermarkets as well, certain parts of the country where the shelves are actually pretty empty as people are stockpiling ahead of this crisis, what they see coming. So that is positive again for supermarkets and airliners. They are really struggling. As you said, Flybe was in a problem area to start with, and sort of reduced bookings is going to weigh on them terribly. British Airways have already said that this is going to affect their yearly annual passenger numbers as well. So this is something that is not just going to be for now. We're going to see the impacts of this going on across the month.
You certainly will. Fiona Cincotta from City Index, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And that's it from me for today, Ben.
Tadhg, good to see you. Thank
next
you very
time.
much indeed
Bye.
for all of that. Yeah, that's great. Just to say, we've heard